Welcome everybody. We're just gonna get kicked off while some more people join. So today is, I think, World Product Day, which is awesome. So we're kind of celebrating by doing a product tank. If you're not familiar with Product Tank, it is a informal meetup for product managers where we talk about all the kinds of ins and outs of products. And tonight's event is actually brought to you by AWH, which is where I work during the daytime. We make custom software products. So if anybody has questions about that stuff, feel free to hit me up after the event. But tonight we have a really awesome guest, Tim, who is the director of product over at Safelite AutoGlass. And Tim, I feel horrible, but I just realized, like, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. So is it Simeone?
You nailed it.
Okay, got
Yeah,
it.
you got it.
See, that's what I thought it was. I just was like, I got caught in the like deer in the headlights for a second there, but yeah, man. So welcome and thank you for coming and agreeing to share some of your experiences.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you.
Yeah, man. So you have a pretty interesting background. I guess, like, so you started sort of in the world of like customer experience, right? Would that be accurate?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I used to live in Chicago, and I worked at like retail stores. I worked for the Cubs in kind of these kind of customer experience roles.
Mm.
And then when I moved to Abercrombie, I kind of had this more focused kind of corporate customer experience role that kind of took off from a CX space.
And now you're doing like way more product focused, director of product over at Safelite. How, I actually don't even remember. It's like you've been doing that for like a few years now, right?
Yeah, I've been at Safe Life for 4 years.
4 years. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I definitely want to dig into all of this stuff, and I have a bunch of questions for you. I should say too to folks, if you have questions while we're going through some of this stuff, feel free to drop it in the chat. We also have a little bit of time sort of at the end dedicated to Q&A. But Tim, I think I'd be surprised if people don't know what Safelite AutoGlass is, just because it's such a massive company and brand organization. But I think it would be helpful just to start out, if you wouldn't mind just telling people kind of like a little bit about what Safelite is.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think even in my interview at Safelite, I don't think I fully understood the breadth of all of the things that Safelite does. So I think it's good to get a kind of a brief overview. But a lot of people know us kind of solving a problem for our customers. So nobody really wants to do business with Safelite, right? They have glass damage, and we have a huge network of really talented technicians that can come out and fix the windshield. So that's really our consumer space. But the things that you don't really know, like that you don't see right on the surface, is that Safelite partners with a bunch of the insurance companies to make it really easy for customers to file a claim. And so that partnership is really, really tight with a lot of insurance companies. And so that there's a whole kind of another part of the business that really partners with insurance companies to help them with all of the glass claims that come into those insurance companies. So it's a very frequent, as you can imagine, a frequent occurrence with all the rocks on the road and things that kind of cause windshield or glass damage. And so that's kind of one of the things that you don't see right on the surface, but is a big part of who Safelite is.
And just for people who don't know, like, how big is Safelite, just like roughly? And I don't know, there's a bunch of different ways to categorize something as big, but how big is it? Yeah.
We've got like about more than 700 like store locations across the country. We service about 6 million customers every year. So it's a lot of people, unfortunately, who have glass damage, but we're happy to be there to help them.
Yeah. Well, I've been very lucky in that I have not yet had to become a customer, but I'm expecting to become a customer at some point, because I feel like, windshields just break. You drive through a hailstorm, somebody throws a rock through your window.
Our data would say that you'll be a customer of ours in 3 to 5 years.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
typically, like it depends even like the car that you drive, right? Like if you drove a Jeep Wrangler, I bet you would be like one of Safelite's top customers, right? Because the vertical, like how vertical that windshield is compared to other windshields just makes it more susceptible to breakage. So there's a lot of different factors. And then if you live in an area where there's a bunch of construction, or the temperature is a big factor in glass damage. So all of those things play a role. And then
that's, by the way, that's super fascinating that that the company has that good of an understanding of the customers that they can even say, hey, within 3 to 5 years on average. But I guess you probably get part of that from working with the insurance companies, right?
We have our own data that kind of shows like, hey, we have a customer today, we're probably going to see them, in another 3 to 5 years. But yeah, like there's a lot of data out there that helps us understand the frequency of our customer for sure.
Gotcha. So I think, it's interesting because you're sort of overseeing the digital product space. So I'm curious to know kind of like what, and I know you mentioned like the insurance claims and that piece, but like, what do you consider your digital products or the core products that you kind of are overseeing?
Yeah, so we kind of think of them in two ways: our consumer-facing products and our partner-facing products. And so the consumer-facing products are ones that you and I would all think of, like Safelite.com. We manage that website. Our customer portal, where after you book, you could go to maintain your appointment. And then because we partner with a lot of insurance companies, we have white labeled properties that we manage as well. So like if you were to just go straight to Allstate, you come to a property that we manage. So those are our consumer facing sites. And then on our partner facing, an example would be like our commercial website. So if you think of like Enterprise, Rent-A-Car, or CarMax, if you're working in an airport enterprise and you have 10 vehicles with glass damage, you can't rent those out. And so we have a website where you can schedule 10 appointments for glass damage. So servicing kind of these different areas of business. You can think of like all the different areas of business where like customers have giant fleets of cars, auction houses. It kind of continues on where we work in the commercial space, and then a number of other different areas like that are more business facing.
Gotcha. So I'm curious kind of, what sort of originally got you excited about product as, a specific kind of focus for you, just like in career and stuff, because it's interesting. People come into product from like all different areas and backgrounds. And so kind of what originally kind of sparked your interest in this?
Yeah. Like when I lived in Chicago, I had worked, as a retail employee for Patagonia. And then I worked in a customer experience role with the Chicago Cubs. And that was like very like one-to-one creating a customer experience. So it really like humanized the benefit of creating that experience from a one-to-one perspective. And so I, as a part of a corporation at Patagonia, where, policies and things would come down to us that empowered us to kind of create this really great customer experience. And so I always kind of like longed for that kind of corporate experience. It was like, oh man, this is so cool. What if I could do this at scale? How cool would it be to kind of like make, instead of one person's experience really great, like a ton of people's experience really great. And so, and when I came to Abercrombie, it was like that opportunity. It was like, oh man, there's a big opportunity to improve the customer experience here. And that's where I really started to like, I was given the opportunity to manage a product of my own, which was specifically around improving the customer experience, which is exciting.
Do you think that you can be that? I almost feel like I already know the answer to this, but like a good product manager without having a strong background in customer experience? Because they seem like they're pretty linked.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't imagine a product manager that isn't kind of on the pulse of what their customer is feeling. And I feel like you don't have to have that background, but you have to have that like driving curiosity about what your customer wants, because that's the whole point of product management. It's like you're thinking about what is the most important thing that the customer wants, and we're going to prioritize those things to make sure that it's creating an excellent customer experience for them.
Totally. So I'm kind of curious to dive into that a little bit more, just in terms of like how you think about customer experience at Safelite. Like, what are some of the things that you use to kind of gauge customer experience?
Yeah, like so I'm responsible for the digital, like the websites, right? Which is just a moment in the larger customer experience that Safelite, offers, right? So we are just a moment in that entire journey. But when you have to think about all the things that have to go really right to make sure that you're delivering like this awesome experience, it's a lot of responsibility for your moment that you get with that customer. And so we're always thinking of like, when we put a feature on the website, we're not just looking at, hey, did more customers, like, do we make it easier for customers to schedule appointments? We're also making sure that like, hey, whatever feature we put on the website, let's make sure that that helped our technician actually cut that piece of glass out and put it in effectively. So if we ever put something on that makes it easier for the customer and harder for the techs, we haven't really won, right? Like that's not a really great customer experience, because we have to make sure that we're empowering the people who are actually, face to face with the customer to be able to provide that really good experience.
Just out of curiosity, for your kind of, you talked about this digital like sort of moment, and I'm curious to know kind of like how the product team is sort of structured around, just the digital domain, like how it, like what, because you're overseeing all of them, right?
Yeah, we're small but mighty. We have one product manager, and we're actually hiring now. So if anybody's interested,
hey, there you go.
Yeah, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. But we have a product manager over consumer, and we have a product manager over our partner sites. And so we kind of ask those product managers to be super focused on those consumers because they're very different. They have different needs, as you can imagine. And so that's kind of how we're structured. And then each product manager works with, a user experience designer, an analytics team partner. They have, a team of developers and QA and Scrum Masters and BAs that all support them in the product team. And so it's really a collaboration of all of those people to kind of deliver the best product to the customer.
So you mentioned earlier kind of prioritizing different things to work on, and I feel like prioritizing is such an interesting topic as a product manager, because they all kind of have the responsibility of prioritizing different features. And I'm curious to know kind of like, how do you think about when something is a big enough kind of issue or task that like it needs to be prioritized and handled sort of right away?
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly having to prioritize, right? Like there's no shortage of good ideas that get presented to us, or that we find, or problems that we need to solve. But generally, I think we think of it as there's like a lot of like models out there that for prioritization. I think the RICE model is the one that comes to mind that I think we use pretty informally, of like, hey, what's the reach? How many customers is this actually affecting? How big of a problem is this? What do we think the impact is going to be? How confident do we think the impact is going to be? And then what's the level of effort? Because we're constantly trying to figure those things out so that we can deliver the most value back to the customer.
Oh, that's a good little like takeaway for people. If you're not familiar with the RICE model, go check that out after the talk, because
I feel like it's one of those models that's like the most informal that you can use, because ideally it's not super rigid, but it's one that you can run through in your head pretty quickly and coach other people through who are asking for features on the website or something like that. It's like, okay, how many people is this affecting? Is this competing with, bigger problems that we need to solve?
For sure. I'm curious too to know, just kind of like while we're sort of talking about like methodology and stuff, like how do things like sort of like agile kind of play into your process for creating new elements of the products?
Yeah, I mean it's we're always trying to get kind of the minimum viable product out, and we're pretty rigorous about getting that to be the smallest level of effort, but still accomplish the goal. And I feel like that's when we think of agile methodology, I think that's like, how can we solve a big problem as fast as we can and learn something about our customer?
Gotcha. That's super fascinating. Hold on a sec. I need to pull up my question list because I feel like I also apologize because I feel like I'm hopping around a bunch. Give me 1 second here.
Yeah.
So I guess like one of the things that you and I were talking about before is, sort of product managers are interesting in that they kind of sit in between a bunch of different things like, design, engineering, customer experience and that sort of stuff. And I guess, what do you think is sort of what makes a good product manager? Is there a certain skill set or a certain kind of trait or characteristic that you think is like super essential to be a good product manager?
Yeah, I think three things come to mind. One is the ability to listen, not only to the customer and develop a really good understanding of what the customer needs and wants, but also to the experts that are surrounded by a product manager, right? Like, just like you said, like the UX designers, the analytics team, your engineering leaders, they all have so much information. And I often say, like, product managers are not experts in any area, but they rely on the expertise of the people that they surround themselves with. And like being able to listen to all of that expertise and information about the customer really empowers the product manager to have the most broad understanding of their product. And it's in like the next thing is like the ability to listen, and then the ability to influence others with that understanding that you're getting from listening, right? Like I feel like, especially at Safelite, if you know your customer really well and you have the data to back it up, there's your ability and power to influence others is huge, because you've done all of the work to be able to get as close as you can to the customer and then inform others who haven't done that. And so that ability to influence, I think, comes from listening actively from the experts that you're surrounding yourself with and the customer. And so like those two things in my mind are like big
ones.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of the things you mentioned is like the data piece of it. And it's interesting because I feel like there's different levels of like technical ability within product managers. Like some people will come from engineering, or somebody might come from design. Do you have any sense of like how technical a product manager needs to be?
Yeah, I think they don't need to be experts in any of those areas, but they do need to be able to ask the right questions to the experts. So like if you're specifically talking about data, knowing how to ask for the right data to the analytics team is super important. That like the right question that leads to the answer, that leads to the next question, that leads to the better feature altogether. And I think to me, like a product manager doesn't need to be super technical or super data focused, but they do need to be able to hang with all of those experts and ask really good questions that allow for like a new level of understanding.
Yeah. No, I feel like that's a great way of putting it and a way of looking at it. It's like, you don't need to be, chief data scientist, but you need to be able to speak fluently with the people who are, extremely rigorous around the data, and be able to speak that language. It's funny because it's almost like you have to speak like 4 or 5 different languages.
Yeah. And that's where like the communication piece, I think, comes in. It's like, I didn't study computer engineering. I didn't study data analysis, but I picked it up along the way from the people that were surrounded, the experts that I got to be surrounded with. And I think that's the thing that a product manager just gets better with more experience, is like, if you really listen, you're starting to pick up this expertise from all of these like really talented people And then you're getting this really kind of broad understanding of a lot of different areas, and it allows you to communicate on a lot of different topics, but also with like a lot of different types of people, right? Like a UX designer is very different than an analytics person, right?
Yep. Totally. Which is, it's interesting too, because you almost need some people skills in order to be able to do that too. Like, you know, I think before when we were talking about, when we were talking about like the importance of like empathy as a product manager, and also kind of just like knowing that, you may not have the right answer.
Yeah, like the humbleness of a product manager to kind of like in a group meeting, just stop and be like, I know I'm not the only one, but I'm completely lost right now. And to be able to kind of take that risk and be vulnerable to a group, I think allows other people to kind of have that same vulnerability and then answer the question that maybe everybody else is asking. But empathy is like so important, right? Like you have to understand all of your partners, what they're going through. Like when you go to an engineering leader and show them like, hey, look at this amazing design, like you have to know how they're going to think about that. They're not going to immediately think, oh, that is an amazing design. They're going to say, oh my God, how on earth am I going to build that? Did they know how much like effort is going to go into that? Now, hopefully you brought your engineering leader in earlier so that you're solving for that. But, making sure that you understand like how other people are thinking and what they're bringing to, a group meeting, I think is super important. And I think that's what empathy is like understanding from other people's perspectives what impact you have on them.
Yeah, for sure. Do you feel like some of that has to come to a certain extent also from experience of working with all of these different groups? Because it's super hard to know what somebody else is thinking, or like how do you learn this?
Yeah, no, it's definitely trial by fire. I remember at Abercrombie early on, I was just like getting all this really interesting data, and it was like, guys, the customers are saying that they want to understand like the model measurements of the models so that they know like how, like what size they could buy on the website. And I was like, so we just need to put like model measurements on the site so that everybody knows like, okay, this model's 6'1" and he's wearing size medium. There you go. Like we need to do that. And going up to a UX designer being like, I have a solution. It's the last thing that they want to know. Like, right. Like they want a really well-defined problem statement, and then to rely on their expertise to figure out what that solution was. And so it's a UX designer that took the time to be like, listen, this is really good data, but I don't want you to come up with a solution. I want you to tell me why you know it's a problem. And I think that's, you start to like, you get those people who like have that grace for you in the moment and like, okay, I'm going to help this person really understand what a UX designer needs. Or, I've also asked for a bunch of data where it's like, I've got 10 questions. Here's 10 questions. It's like, just tell me the one question that you really want to know. And that's like what a data analyst is like. So I think there's a lot of experiences like that where you just kind of get knocked down by that person, like hopefully in a good way, that says like, this is how I want to be talked to. This is how I want you to come to me with this information. And I think over time you start to learn the different types of people and what they're expecting.
I think that's such a good like piece of, experience to share with the group too, just in case there are some of the, earlier on like product managers, because I imagine that is somewhat a struggle in everyone's mind, even if you're not a product manager. Like how do you kind of get buy-in and treat people and talk to people the way that they want to be talked to, and that's just a super important piece, I think, of the communication skill with all of these different types. I want to say types of people, but like people in different roles with different kind of attitudes and personalities and that sort of stuff.
And sometimes you just have to ask them, right? Like, when we were in the office, I would stop by our engineering leader's desk all the time. And it was like, I was like, oh, I'm doing this kind of frequently. I wonder how this is like affecting him. Cause he's developing, right? And so a lot of developers would like to be in that flow. And I just asked him, I was like, hey, I come by and bug you a lot. Is that like troublesome? Like, does that bother you? And he's like, yeah, like if I have my headphones on, I'm kind of in my flow and I don't really want to be interrupted. And I was like, that's a good boundary for me to know. I didn't know
Mm.
that. And then I was like, is that pretty common like with most developers? He's like, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So that kind of gives me like a little bit of like, okay, I need to understand that about how to approach a developer. And that's like something you take with you. It's like, hey, I've heard the word on the street with most developers. You go to another company, right? It's like, okay, do headphones mean like I shouldn't bother you? It's like, I'll just like come at another time. So I think those are the things that you kind of like pick up. But asking somebody sometimes is just like the best way to be like, how do I, what do you want? Like it's just like the customer of the product that you're building. It's like, you just have to ask them and then listen.
I love that. And actually, it's funny. I saw my coworker Katie laughing because I probably interrupt her all the time.
See?
Sorry, Katie. But no, I love that. So actually, there's a question that came in the chat, and it is, how do you learn about customer needs? This is a big question.
Yeah.
What method and techniques do you use to find their needs?
Yeah, that's a really good question because there's a lot of different ways, right? Like for Safelite, we do a number of things. We have surveys where we just ask the customer. We do usability sessions where we sit behind one-way mirror and we develop a prototype and we bring in customers and then we have them react to our designs. We hear from our contact center issues that come up. We hear from technicians, struggles that they see in the field that maybe we can improve digitally. When I was at Abercrombie, that was the product that I managed. It was a voice of customer solution where anywhere a customer interacted with us, we would, it was a product that we would take that information. So it could be like a product review or a chat or a contact at the contact center or a customer talking to a store employee, and it all kind of came into one data repository and we connected it to transactional data. And then we pushed it back out to people who could actually drive the change. So like, I remember there was like a lot of data coming through for the sweaters merchant. And it was like, all these customers were like, I can't get the sweater over my head. I can't get the sweater over my head. And we shared that data with the merchant. And we also said like, hey, here's an example of a whole bunch of customers. I think you need to increase the circumference of the hole for the sweater. And we looked at return rates and stuff like that. So I think when you listening to the customer's needs, it doesn't only come from the customer. Sometimes it comes from transactional data and qualitative data, right? So like we had customers saying that the hole in the sweater was too small, but we also had return rates that helped support that story. That was like the quantifiable data. So it was humanizing the customer experience and then supporting it with like numbers that actually said, hey, and this is how big the problem actually is. So I think, transactional data is one, usability, surveys, listening to other people within your company that are closer to the customer than you are is also super helpful.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely there. It's so funny because there's so many different ways to measure needs, like you said. And I think that what you pointed out is very important, the qualitative and the quantitative piece, because when you neglect the story behind the data, sometimes the data gives you the wrong picture. Or if you just listen to the story and then the data is telling you something completely different, you have to, you're also missing that side of it. So that's
I always say like it's the qualitative data that helps us ask the right questions to the data. And then it's the quantitative data that helps us ask the right questions to the customer or to the people who are working with the customer, right? Like you can see something in the data that says, that's a little weird. And you can go to the technicians and say, hey, why do you think, people are canceling their appointment at their mobile appointments? And then the technician would like maybe matter of factly say, well, it's because it was raining that day. It was like, oh, okay. Maybe that's a problem we can start to solve. Are these two things connected? And then you do that analysis to say, okay, this is true, or this isn't true, or this was, maybe not the conclusion we should make. So
one question I have too is just kind of on your experience, and this kind of might play into this. I think it's maybe less of a customer need discovery tool, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But how do you kind of incorporate like A/B testing into all of this stuff? Because I saw that you had kind of built out this practice around A/B testing, and I just kind of want to know, like, what is the story with that?
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much don't change anything to our website that we don't A/B test. There's some instances where I have a guy on my team who says like it's a no regrets for the customer, and if it's a no regrets for the customer, we just put it in, right? Because it's like nobody could litigate that this is not a benefit for the customer, so we're just going to do this. But for other changes, we test almost everything. And for me, it's the way to be able to tell the story confidently across to the rest of the group that, hey, we made this change and we saw this effect, and we are very certain because we did this test to show that this actually improved the customer experience, or it made it easier for customers to schedule their appointment. And so to me, having that structure of measurement in place allows you to sit more confidently with the features that you're putting forth, and then be able to tell that story to the rest of the company that says, we made this change and here's the result, and here's how confident we are in that result.
So when you do A/B testing, are you actually making changes on the live website and then, basically running a test around the time window when it was up and seeing what the difference in the impact is?
Yeah, that's exactly what you do. So like imagine a whole bunch of volume coming to our website, everybody gets a number, and depending on that number, you fall into a certain experiment. So at any given moment, like we typically have 4 to 6 A/B tests live on the site. And so depending on the number, you're either going to fall into the test or control of one of those tests, basically. And so we run that test depending on where it is on the website. It takes, typically around 4 weeks for us to kind of get statistically significant results. And then once we get there, we're looking at the kind of primary metrics and the secondary metrics. And then again, making sure that it doesn't, make it harder for our technicians to do the job. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's like just a split test that comes through. And then we use that to kind of say, hey, this was beneficial or this was not.
Super, super interesting. One other thing I feel like I have to ask you about, because this is a cool thing that I haven't really had personal experience with, but you mentioned the one-way sort of mirror or window or however.
Oh yeah.
Like how do you use that? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's usually what we'll do before an A/B test. So we partner with a research firm, McDougall Research, and they do like
is that Leah?
Leah
McDougall?
Leah.
Okay, yeah, I know Leah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great.
Awesome.
And pre-COVID, we were behind that one-way mirror, but they've also adapted to be like digital. And we did one recently, and it was like really powerful because then the customer's like looking at the screen right there and you get to see it. But we'll come to them with a prototype of an idea, and it's usually like larger bets that we have around like, hey, we're going to transform this entire page. And we'll bring it to them, and we usually because we're emotionally attached to our design, to the problem, and so any question that we're going to ask the customer is going to be biased, and so we partner with them so that we can get really good pure research coming out of it. And so we all sit behind that one-way mirror, and customers come in and interact with that prototype. Our UX designers are there, our product managers are there, and we're all just watching. We can see their interaction on a screen in the back. And then you get all of the customer questions, and we ask them to, talk through what they're thinking so that we can start to like understand how our design is really like leading, them through our funnel. And it's really, really helpful. Like a lot of the usability sessions we've done have resulted in very positive A/B tests. So.
I love that, because I think, usability, it's so good to be there and kind of see what they're doing and hear those thoughts, but it's somewhat challenging to not bias people unless you have some kind of third party, or, you're behind a glass window, which is kind of interrogation.
It's super fun. Yeah.
It's almost like you're in your own like cop show or something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a blast. When it was the first time that I had done it. They had done it at Abercrombie, but I wasn't involved. But when I came to Safelite, it was like, oh, this is so cool. We get like snacks and we just get to watch customers like interact with our designs and ask them questions. And it's great.
Man, if you that would be a fun product management party. If you ever want to host a party, we can just like come in, we'll hang out, get some snacks and watch some customers do some usability testing.
I'd love it. I'd love it. Yeah.
That's cool. So well, yeah, thanks for that. That's super fascinating. And another element, it just seems like you do so many different things, which is awesome to hear about with your experience. So let me see here. I guess there's another question about funding, how funding changes work at Safelite. Do you think it works well? Are you allocating a product funding that you have decision-making authority over? I guess like how do you make decisions about, it's kind of like a prioritization question, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, this question is good. And I think for us, we use our A/B testing kind of history, right? Like we've created this backlog of history and this kind of relationship with finance that says like, hey, here are 8 A/B tests that we ran that increased our appointment rate or increased our KPI, and here's the proof. And we A/B tested it. It was 95% statistical significant, which is a standard in the industry. So again, like telling that story allows us to kind of fund the future, right? Because now we've built this history of saying, here's the test that went positive. Here's where we failed miserably. Like sometimes like A/B tests just go really bad. But the way that we kind of fund the next year is saying like, hey, look back, we had a success rate of about 55%. And, a certain percentage of those resulted in additional jobs, or it made it easier for the customer to schedule their appointment. And so we look at the next year and say, yeah, we did 8 last year. We could probably do 8 again this year. And so we fund the year of optimization, and we'll say we're going to run 35 A/B tests, and half of them are going to fail, but half of them are going to be good. And that's kind of how we work the business case to kind of fund year-long optimization. And thankfully, Safelite is very very focused on our digital platforms, and so they care deeply about making sure that it's really easy for a customer to come and schedule an appointment. And to make it easy for a customer to schedule, we have to have this kind of constant optimization of the website and research into the customer. And so I'll say it's not hard to get that investment because they care so deeply about our customer and so deeply about our digital platforms.
So I definitely have a few more questions of my own, but I kind of want to open it up. I know some people have already thrown questions into the chat, and thank you for that. Those are both great questions. But folks, if you want to unmute, if you have a question, this would be a good time to do that. We've got Tim captive here. So are there any questions at the moment over any of the stuff we've gone over, or Tim's story or experiences? People are shy. Also, sometimes it means I've done a great job with the interview.
Yeah,
so
you are a good interviewer.
So thank you, man. Appreciate that. So one question I have is kind of around like metrics and how I know that you're doing a lot of different tests. I imagine there's a lot of different kinds of metrics you care about, but what are sort of like the core metrics that you really focus on and live with in your daily operation?
Yeah, I'll say we have core metrics like appointment rate, like a customer scheduling appointment is like our success, right? Like if they made it to the end and scheduled an appointment, something must have been easy within that experience to allow them to do that. So that's like a main KPI. But we also look at like, did that job actually get done? Like for some reason, why did the customer cancel? Or, did something go wrong out in the field? Were we responsible for something that happened that caused the job to not, finish? So retention of that appointment that was scheduled is a core metric for us. NPS is a metric that we will look at, but there's a lot of, I'll say like each experiment, we write a hypothesis for each of our experiments that that the experiment either validates or invalidates. And so sometimes, we'll always look at our primary metrics, but sometimes NPS will be more relevant than, some of these other metrics. So those are things that we, we have our core metrics, but each test has its own kind of like definition of success. And sometimes that includes our core metrics and sometimes it doesn't.
This is kind of a specific question, but like when you are thinking about your hypotheses and the amount of change that you want to see, do you have a good rule of thumb around like, okay, maybe it's like 10% different, or like where do you kind of set that level to say, okay, this is a validated hypothesis?
Yeah. So, our hypothesis do a couple of things. It creates like a framework in which it defines the size of the audience. So we'll say like, we believe that for all users coming into our sales funnel, that by making the progress bar more prominent, more customers will have an understanding of where they are in the funnel. And therefore, more customers will submit appointments. So it's less quantifiable of like, what do we think the change is going to be, to instead it's more, what is the audience? What is the change? What's the effect? And then what is the rationale of that, why we think that effect might happen? And then what's the measurement that we actually use? So it's really kind of a framework that allows us to kind of say, this is what we want to learn from the customer. If our success metric comes true, then we'll know that maybe this truth is true about our customer. If it doesn't, then we've invalidated what we thought about our customer, and that's just as valuable. So failing for us is just as valuable as a successful test, because ideally every test leads to a new truth about our customer.
I love that. And that is a good thing to remember, because sometimes it might feel more exciting when you get the positive insights, where it's like, oh, we figured this thing out. But, it's just as important to not pursue things from like a risk or time investment or funding, and knowing that is also extremely valuable.
Yeah, it never feels good to be wrong, but it is part of the process of optimization of like, I was wrong. My hypothesis was wrong. I guess I don't, it's always humbling too, because it's like, okay, I guess I don't know our customer as well as I thought I did. And so that kind of continues the hunger to know your customer better.
With your like audience sizes that you use, I feel like I'm getting like super in the weeds. So if I'm losing people, please like interrupt. But like, do you start with like a certain audience size, like maybe like 1,000 interactions, or I mean, you have a live website, so I imagine there's potentially like a lot more in your audience, right?
Yeah. So we our experiment framework, we divide our volume basically into 4 different mutually exclusive partitions, right? So we can run 4 mutually exclusive tests, or we can run them on top of each other in those partitions. But like generally, like our Fix My Glass, where people go to schedule their appointment, people drop off throughout that, right? So it's a funnel that goes like this. And so any experiment that we run, top of funnel, we have a lot of volume, right? Yeah. But if we're running an experiment towards the end of our funnel, the volume gets really short, gets really small. And so the time it takes to get results for a test that's at the end of our funnel is a lot longer than that at the top of our funnel, because we have such a big sample.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. So I'll pause briefly and let anybody have questions for Tim.
So I'll ask a question for Tim. This is Jamie Falk. I'm a product manager over at Nationwide Insurance.
Oh, nice.
Hey, Jamie.
So at Safelite, I guess within your product manager role, it sounds like you're involved in a lot of the optimization type work. Are you also doing like longer term strategic visions for where you want to go with the website? And if so, like what kind of time frame are you looking at as far as where you want to bring the website in the long run?
Yeah, that's like we do focus a lot on the given year. I would say, like, a lot of our optimizations are planned from the previous year, but we always are trying like new things to try and validate, big bets, right? So all of our A/B tests are sometimes, some of our A/B tests are very incremental to the existing experience, and then some of our A/B tests are like big bets. And so if a big bet kind of goes well, we'll say, okay, that might be something that we need to kind of plan into a future design or a future funnel. And so we will often use our A/B testing to kind of say, okay, this is a sign that is more seismic. It's a more seismic change to our sales funnel than some of these incremental changes that will lead to a longer term roadmap. But generally, I think we plan for the year, and then we're constantly looking a little bit, and probably two to 3 years ahead.
Okay. And then are your big bets funded separately from your own product funding that you use for optimization?
It depends how big they are. But what I would say is, like, we probably have like 3 or 4 kind of big bets built into like our year-long optimization. But we kind of try and mix it up. But like, if there's ever like a complete redesign of like our homepage or our content site, that is usually a separate funding typically. But sometimes we can, frame that as, hey, this is one giant A/B test that we're going to put within the funding for the year. So yeah.
All right. Well, great. Thanks a lot for sharing, Tim. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you.
Jamie, great question. Great answer, Tim. Other questions for Tim? I always love like the waiting, because it's like, I know somebody has a question.
Yeah. It's like, how comfortable are you with silence, right?
Yeah. I'm actually very good with silence. I don't know.
Me too.
Yeah. I enjoy it. It's like peaceful. Well, good stuff. I mean, if there aren't any, we can definitely leave it at that and just assume that we did an amazing interview.
You did.
Yes.
You asked some good questions.
Yes. Well, thank you. And I guess, yeah, thanks, Tim, for coming and sharing this. I feel like I personally got a lot out of this and have some frameworks and things to think about going forward. So I really appreciate it. And yeah, maybe we'll have to do another one sometime when things are back in person. I actually don't know if we're ever going to be back in person, but I hope so.
I hope so. I hope
so. Yeah. All right. Comment came in. It was an amazing interview. If you send across the recording, I'll be watching it again. All right. That's some great voice of customer right there.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody. And thanks, Tim. We will see you at the next Product Tank.